He thought money could buy anything. Power, silence, even love. But when the cameras flashed and the truth finally came out, the man who once ruled the boardroom couldn't even lift his head. The press conference room was in chaos. Flashes blinding, voices echoing, reporters shouting questions he could no longer control. Mr. Cole, did you pay her to be your wife? Was it all a lie? And in the middle of that noise stood her, Mallory Reed, the girl he once tried to buy for 6 months, now the woman he could never afford to lose. He looked at her like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, nothing left to offer but the truth. And for the first time in his life, Evan Cole didn't hide behind lawyers or power or pride. He simply said, yes, there was a contract. The room gasped. The empire trembled. And in that moment, the man who had everything lost the one thing he couldn't replace, her respect. He thought he was buying an image, but what he sold was his soul. You want to know how he lost everything? Let's rewind. But when the cameras stop flashing and the world moves on, what's left of a man who built his life on contracts? Subscribe now, or this might be our last meeting. Follow, comment, and share to stay connected. Don't miss out. Let's dive in. New York City, the city that never truly sleeps. It just hides its exhaustion under sunlight and ambition. It's noon. The heat drifts through the streets like a tired sigh, carrying the scent of grilled onions, roasted peppers, and brewed coffee from the food trucks that line the corner of 5th and Hope. Every sound blends. The hiss of the grill, the hum of engines, the chatter of strangers trying to escape their own thoughts for just a moment. And among those food trucks, there's one that stands out. Not because it's the biggest or the cleanest, but because of the woman inside. Her name is Mallory Reed, 27, brown ponytail tied high, sleeves rolled up, eyes sharp from years of learning how to survive when nothing goes as planned. She owns the Copper Taco, though own might be too generous a word. The bank still calls it theirs. A $60,000 loan hanging over her head, interest climbing faster than her daily sales. Every morning, she unlocks the truck before sunrise. She scrubs the counter, checks the burners, wipes the fog from the window, and whispers to herself the same thing she's whispered every day for 2 years. Just keep going, Mallory. One more day. To her customers, she's cheerful, efficient. She remembers names, adds extra salsa, and smiles even when her body aches. Because kindness is her armor, the only thing she can afford to give away for free. But behind that armor, her life is slipping through her fingers. The rent on her tiny apartment is overdue. The food truck loan is past due. And every evening, she opens her mailbox with a breath she doesn't want to take, half expecting another letter stamped final notice. Still, she fights to keep her head high, because somewhere in that tiny apartment is her younger brother, Tyler, 19, smart, stubborn, and carrying the kind of hope she can't afford to lose. He wants to finish college. He doesn't know how close they are to losing everything. She's made sure of that. She wants to give him the chance she never had. But dreams cost money, and money has been walking out of her life faster than it's coming in. On that particular Thursday afternoon, she's too busy flipping tortillas to notice the man who just joined the line. Tall, composed, wearing a gray tailored suit that probably costs more than her entire truck. He doesn't shout his order or check his phone like everyone else. He just waits quietly, watching, and for reasons she can't explain. Mallory feels the weight of his gaze before she even looks up. Across the counter, Evan Cole studies her like he's studying a problem he's already decided to solve. 33, CEO of Cole Enterprises. He owns half the buildings casting shadows over her truck, glass towers with his name etched in silver. A man who doesn't stand in lines. A man used to being served. A man who's never had to fight for a single day of survival. But today, he's standing there, surrounded by the smell of street food and the chaos of ordinary life. And as she slides a burrito onto the grill, Evan Cole tilts his head slightly, intrigued by how someone with so little could look so unbothered by the world that's been trying to break her. There's something about her. The focus in her eyes, the steadiness in her hands, the way she laughs politely at customers who complain about prices they can easily afford. It's the kind of strength that can't be bought. And that's exactly what draws him in. He doesn't know it yet, but the moment he steps forward to order, the balance between power and pride, between money and meaning will start to shift. Because Evan Cole is about to meet a woman who can't be purchased. And Mallory Reed is about to meet a man who's never been told no. Two worlds about to collide. One built on struggle, the other on control. And in the middle of that quiet Los Angeles afternoon, the first spark of an empire's downfall begins. With a single burrito order. The lunchtime rush had slowed. The air smelled like rain and roasted peppers. Mallory wiped sweat from her brow and leaned against the counter for just a moment, her hands still trembling from the heat of the griddle. That's when she noticed him. The man in the gray suit, still there, still watching. Most customers grabbed their food and left within minutes. But this one lingered like a question that refused to leave. He stepped forward, calm, controlled. His shoes didn't belong on pavement this cracked, and his voice didn't match the noise of the street. One carne asada burrito, he said. His tone was even, but his eyes never left hers. Mallory nodded, wrapped the burrito with the speed of someone who didn't have time for conversation, and slid it across the counter. $8 even. He reached for his wallet and then paused. Something flickered behind his eyes. Something deliberate. He leaned forward just slightly, close enough that his voice dropped to a murmur. Mallory blinked, thrown off balance. I've seen you before, downtown. You didn't notice me then. I'm sorry, have we met? He smiled, the kind of smile that meant nothing and everything at once. Not yet. A heartbeat. Then softly, marry me. Her laughter escaped before she could stop it. A short, nervous sound, sharp as disbelief. I'm sorry, what did you just say? He didn't flinch. Didn't even smile this time. I need a wife for 6 months. A merger clause. Investors trust families more than bachelors. The spatula slipped from her fingers, clattering against the metal grill. The sizzling hiss filled the silence between them. She froze, half convinced she'd misheard him. A stranger, standing in a suit worth more than her truck, was proposing, like he was reading from a business plan. You're insane, she whispered, shaking her head. You don't even know me. You're right, he said simply. But I know what I need. And you're the only one who fits it. Mallory stared at him, her pulse thundering in her ears. Every instinct told her to laugh, to push him away, to throw him out of the line. But there was something in his tone. Not arrogance, not cruelty, something colder. Like this wasn't about love at all. Like it was a deal he'd already decided to make. What is this? She demanded. Some kind of joke? He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and placed a sleek black folder on the counter between them. No flowers, no ring, just paperwork. Read it, he said. Then decide. And before she could respond, he turned and walked away, calm, unhurried, disappearing into the blur of the city. Mallory stood there, the folder heavy in her hands. The smell of burnt tortillas fills the air. Behind her, someone cleared their throat, the next customer waiting to order. But for once, Mallory didn't move. Her entire life had been built on predictable struggle. Bills, work, exhaustion. But this was something else entirely. As she stared at the folder, one thought clawed its way to the surface. Whatever that man just started, it's not ending here. That night, the city didn't sleep. but neither did she. The rain came quietly, the kind that doesn't wash things clean, just makes them glisten long enough to remind you they're still broken. Mallory sat at her tiny kitchen table, her apron still on, her hands stained with chili oil and exhaustion. The black folder sat in front of her, untouched, like something alive, something waiting to be opened. She told herself it didn't matter, that whatever was inside belonged to another world, his world, not hers. She had no reason to care. And yet, her eyes kept drifting toward it. Tyler was asleep in the next room. His notes were spread across the couch, textbooks open, highlighted, edges worn. He'd been studying until midnight before finally passing out, his phone still playing soft music to drown out the sound of their leaking faucet. Mallory watched him for a long moment, her throat tight. He looked so peaceful, too young to know what it felt like to carry the weight of someone else's survival. She turned back to the folder. Its cover gleamed faintly under the weak yellow light. Her reflection stared back. Tired eyes, cracked lips, the faint streak of a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. She reached out, then pulled her hand back. No, it was absurd. Whatever this was, it couldn't be real. Marry a man she just met? For money? That wasn't who she was. That wasn't how she was raised. She tried everything else first, called the bank, checked the loan app again, even drafted a post for a catering side job she knew she couldn't manage. None of it would come in time. She pushed the folder away, then almost immediately pulled it back again. The bank notice sat on the counter beside it, stamped in red. Final warning. The total was enough to make her stomach twist. Her rent, 2 months overdue. The truck's maintenance bill untouched. Tyler's tuition due in 10 days. She opened her phone, scrolled through her messages. Unpaid invoices. Missed calls from the landlord. A polite text from the loan officer that didn't feel polite anymore. Everywhere she looked, the same truth stared back at her. She was running out of time. Her hands trembled as she finally opened the folder. The first page was clean, formal, written in the kind of legal precision that stripped all humanity from a deal. Marriage contract agreement between Evan Cole and Mallory Reed. Her breath caught. She kept reading, clause after clause. 6 months of marriage. Mandatory attendance at social events. Strict confidentiality. In return, her debts cleared. Her food truck protected. Her brother's tuition paid in full. A stipend, enough to live, to breathe, to finally stop drowning. And then the final line, handwritten in deliberate ink. This arrangement is not emotional. It is professional. Evan Cole. The words felt colder than the rain outside. No warmth. No affection. Just the kind of control that belonged to someone who'd never had to beg for help. Mallory's chest ached. She slammed the folder shut and pushed it away again, her hands trembling. What kind of man did this? What kind of woman would say yes? She stood up, pacing the room. Her reflection followed her in the dark window, defiant, desperate, cornered. Somewhere deep inside, her pride screamed. But the part of her that had watched her brother skip dinner last week stayed silent. Hours passed. The rain softened to a whisper. She sat down again. The folder was still there, quiet, patient, inevitable. Mallory rested her forehead against her hands, whispering to the empty room. What am I supposed to do? No one answered. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights slicing through the raindrops. For a brief second, the folder caught the light, glinting like a door slightly open. And when morning came, Mallory Reed, the girl who had always chosen pride over pity, finally whispered the words she never thought she'd say. Maybe, just maybe. Because sometimes survival doesn't sound like courage. Sometimes it just sounds like surrender. And that single whisper, that quiet, trembling maybe, was the beginning of everything she could never take back. The next morning came gray and unkind. The city was awake, but Mallory felt like she hadn't slept in years. The black folder sat on her kitchen table, still open. The ink on those pages seemed to breathe, whispering things she didn't want to hear. Every reason to say no, and every reason she couldn't. She hadn't truly decided, not yet. But sometimes you walk toward a decision long before you can say it out loud. By the time the clock hit 11, she had already made up her mind, or maybe the world had made it for her. She found him in a cafe downtown. Not one of the cozy ones with mismatched chairs and free refills. This place looked like it had been built for silence. Tall glass windows, marble counters, no music, no laughter, just the steady hum of money being comfortable. Evan Cole was already there, sitting by the window. He wasn't reading a newspaper or checking his phone. He was just waiting. Still, like he'd known she'd come. Mallory paused at the door. Every instinct told her to turn around. She didn't belong here. Not in her thrift store jacket. Not with the smell of street food still clinging to her skin. But the memory of Tyler's face when she'd told him they'd figure it out pushed her forward. She walked to his table, every step heavier than the last. Evan looked up, eyes calm, unreadable. No smile, no greeting, just 2 words. You came. She sat down, her hands folded in her lap, trying to steady the tremor in her fingers. I read your proposal, she said quietly. And he asked it like a man asking about quarterly profits, not a human heart. No urgency, no emotion, just business. Mallory looked at him, really looked at him. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfectly untouchable. It feels like selling myself, she whispered. I don't belong in your world, Mr. Cole. I sell tacos. You sell illusions. For a moment, something flickered across his face. A crack, a question. Then it was gone. You're not selling yourself, he said simply. You're renting stability. 6 months. You'll have peace, your debts cleared, your brother's tuition paid. In return, I'll have credibility. She stared at him. You make it sound like a business transaction. It is, he replied. We both gain something. Mallory laughed under her breath, bitter and small. You really believe everything can be bought, don't you? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the folder and slid it toward her. Read the last page. She hesitated, then turned to the back. Her heart stuttered. Attached was a letter, stamped, signed, from his legal team. It confirmed everything. Her debts erased. Her brother's tuition prepaid. Her truck placed under full protection of Cole Enterprises. Her lips parted. For the first time in months, she felt the faintest whisper of relief. It wasn't happiness, just the absence of panic. And somehow, that felt even more dangerous. She looked up at him again. And when it's over, you walk away, he said. Free, clean, unattached. His voice didn't waver, but his eyes told a different story. There was something buried there, exhaustion, maybe loneliness, the kind of emptiness that no amount of money could quiet. The silence between them stretched thin. Mallory's breath came slow, uneven. Then she said the words that would haunt her for years. Her hand hovered above the paper. Every instinct screamed no, but survival whispered yes. When the pen finally touched down, it felt less like a choice and more like gravity. Evan's jaw tightened just slightly. He nodded once and handed her a pen. No ceremony, no pretense, just ink and paper, 2 lives rewritten in the quiet corner of a coffee shop. Her name trembled across the page. And with each letter, she felt something inside her loosen and something else lock into place. When it was done, he reached across the table and turned the contract toward himself. His signature came out steady, sharp, practiced. like a man who'd signed away pieces of his soul before. He folded the pages neatly, slid them back into the folder, and stood. "Welcome to the arrangement, Ms. Reed." He paused, eyes meeting hers for just a second, then corrected himself. "Mrs. Cole." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Mallory felt them settle in her chest, heavy and irreversible. In less than 10 minutes, she'd gone from food truck owner to the wife, on paper, of a man she didn't understand. Outside, the city carried on as if nothing had happened. Cars honked. People laughed. The world kept spinning. But for Mallory Reed, everything had shifted. The line between freedom and survival had blurred. And in the space between those two things, she had just sold the rest of her peace. The next few days unfolded like a dream she didn't remember agreeing to, or maybe a nightmare she hadn't yet woken from. Mallory Reed, food truck girl, daughter of no one, fighter of bills and exhaustion, was gone. In her place stood Mrs. Evan Cole, a name that sounded expensive enough to echo. The transition began quietly, first with a phone call, then a black car that showed up outside her apartment, its windows tinted deep enough to swallow reflection. Inside sat a woman with sharp cheekbones and a sharper tone. "Mr. Cole's assistant. You'll need to come with me." No small talk, no welcome, just direction, precise, efficient, sterile. By noon, Mallory stood in a penthouse suite overlooking the entire city, the kind of view that made her food truck look like a toy below. Stylists circled her like sculptors around a statue that hadn't agreed to be made. They pinned her hair, powdered her face, spoke in words that felt foreign: couture, silhouette, aesthetic. All of it sounding like another language entirely. Fabrics she'd never touched were draped across her shoulders. Jewelry glittered in front of mirrors. And in every reflection, she saw less of herself. "This color suits her," one stylist said. "She'll need posture training," another added. Mallory didn't argue. She just stood still, trying not to drown in the ocean of mirrors that surrounded her. Days blurred together. Fittings, posture lessons, mock interviews. Each one sanding away a little more of who she'd been. When she finally looked up, the woman staring back wasn't a fighter anymore. She looked like a promise someone else had written. Her curls were polished into soft waves. Her calloused hands, the hands that once flipped tortillas, were now manicured to perfection. Her jeans and hoodie replaced with a cream silk dress that shimmered like the moon in daylight. It was beautiful. It was suffocating. That evening, Evan Cole arrived for the first fitting. The room went silent when he entered. He didn't ask questions. It was strange. The man who'd spoken in contracts now looked almost uncertain, as if he wasn't sure how to stand in his own creation. Didn't compliment, just observed. His eyes moved from her dress to her face, studying her the same way he studied markets, mergers, and takeovers. Then, softly, "It suits you." Mallory swallowed hard. "I feel like a fraud." He tilted his head slightly. "Then we practice until you don't." She wanted to hate how calm he sounded, how every word came out like an order disguised as reassurance. He extended his hand. "Come on." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. They walked across the marble floor, her heels clicking unevenly, her balance uncertain. "Look ahead," he murmured. "Not down. You don't need to prove you belong. You just have to stand like you already do." For a brief moment, she let him lead, the rhythm of his stride steadying hers. The world outside that glass wall suddenly distant, blurred by height and distance. But as soon as he released her hand, the illusion shattered. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Her palms were sweating inside $1,000 gloves. "You make it sound easy," she said quietly. "Belonging isn't supposed to be easy," he replied. "It's supposed to be earned." She looked at him. This man who could buy belonging anywhere, and wondered if he even knew what earning felt like. Days turned into weeks. She learned how to walk in heels, how to smile without revealing uncertainty, how to speak at dinners where everyone wore power like perfume. She memorized names, charities, board members, and every night when she went home to the penthouse suite Evan had assigned her, she would sit by the window, look down at the food trucks still glowing under streetlights, and whisper, "Don't forget who you are." Because the more she learned to survive in Evan's world, the more she felt herself fading in it. But then came the first event, a charity luncheon hosted by Cole Enterprises. The cameras, the crowd, the polished smiles, and for the first time, Mallory would stand beside Evan Cole, not as the girl who sold burritos, but as the woman the world now called his wife. What she didn't know was that this event would mark the beginning of something she could never undo. Not just the end of her disguise, but the slow unraveling of his. The ballroom looked like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers, gold-rimmed glasses, violins playing softly under the hum of polite conversations. Every inch of the room whispered money. Every person inside wore confidence like a second skin. And at the center of it all, Evan Cole, flawless in his black suit. Every handshake, every glance calculated to perfection. He belonged here. He always had. But tonight, the cameras weren't only on him. Tonight, they were on the woman standing quietly beside him, Mallory Reed Cole. Her dress shimmered under the soft lights, ivory silk, delicate but strong. Her hair pinned back. Her smile rehearsed, her heart anything but steady. Every step she took felt like walking through water. Slow, heavy, the sound of her own breathing louder than the orchestra. Evan leaned closer and whispered, "Relax. Just smile. Let them see you." She tried. She really did. But the moment they entered the crowd, she could feel it. The shift in the air. The subtle sting of judgment that hides behind polite curiosity. Eyes followed her. Whispers bloomed like wildfire. "That's her. The food truck girl? I heard he met her downtown." Mallory's pulse raced. Her palms slicked with sweat. She tried to stay composed, but the weight of their stares pressed down like gravity. Then came the reporter. Perfect smile. Perfect posture. Microphone raised just high enough to feel like a test. "Mr. Cole," she said sweetly, "could you tell us who this lovely woman is by your side tonight?" Evan didn't hesitate. "My wife," he said. The word landed like a stone in the silence. Mallory froze. Wife. Hearing it out loud from his mouth made the room blur for just a moment. The reporter turned to her, smiling expectantly. "And what do you do, Mrs. Cole?" "For a heartbeat," Mallory panicked. She could have lied, said something elegant, something safe. But instead, something inside her snapped back into place. She lifted her chin, looked the reporter straight in the eye, and said softly, "I run a food truck. We serve tacos, burritos, and quesadillas. It's not glamorous, but it feeds people. And that's something I'm proud of." That moment went viral. Hashtag Real Mrs. Cole trending within hours. The world loved her honesty until they didn't. The silence that followed was electric. Half the room didn't know whether to laugh or cringe. But then, slowly, someone began to clap. Then another, and another. A ripple of applause swept through the room. Real. Surprised. Honest. Even the reporter blinked, caught off guard, smiling wider than before. "Well, that's refreshing." Evan turned to her, and for the first time, there was something in his eyes. That wasn't calculation or control. It was respect. Maybe even admiration. She hadn't just survived that moment. She'd owned it. Mallory smiled back, and in that instant, something inside her shifted. She realized she didn't need to fit this world to survive in it. She just needed to stay herself, because authenticity, in a room full of pretenders, is the rarest kind of power. The charity luncheon had been a small victory, a ripple in a world that didn't know her name. But the gala was a storm. The Cole Foundation Annual Gala, a gathering of investors, journalists, heirs, and power brokers. A night where alliances were made over champagne, and reputations were broken under chandeliers. It was the kind of event where every glance carried meaning, every smile hid a motive, and every mistake could end careers. And this year, all eyes weren't on Evan Cole. They were on his mysterious new wife. The car rolled up to the red carpet entrance. Mallory sat in the back seat, her dress a deep shade of midnight blue, soft fabric catching the glow of passing cameras. The stylist had done her hair in a low knot. Simple but elegant, the kind that said everything and nothing at once. She smoothed her palms against her gown, trying to quiet the storm inside her chest. Evan sat beside her, composed as always, checking his cufflinks like the world couldn't touch him. Mallory glanced at him. He noticed. "You'll do fine," he said, his voice calm, steady. "Easy for you to say," she murmured. "You belong there. I'm just playing dress up." He turned to her, his gaze firm, unflinching. "You're not pretending, Mallory. You're my wife. That's enough." The words caught her off guard, not because they sounded warm, but because for the first time, they sounded true. The car door opened. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. Reporters shouted their names. Her arm instinctively tightened around his, and Evan's hand covered hers in quiet reassurance. Together, they walked through the sea of lights, into the ballroom. Inside, everything sparkled. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble, a string quartet playing something expensive and invisible. People turned to look, not with curiosity this time, but calculation, like they were dissecting her presence, weighing her worth. Mallory felt every stare, every smirk disguised as a smile. Then came the approach, a woman with diamonds around her neck, and the kind of smile that always hides a knife behind it. "Mr. Cole." "Mrs. Cole," she greeted sweetly. "What a surprise. I don't recall seeing you at last year's gala." Evan smiled politely. "You wouldn't have. My wife prefers to work quietly." The woman's smile sharpened. "Quiet work? And what kind of work would that be?" Somewhere in the crowd, a flashbulb popped, one too deliberate, one too close. Neither of them noticed, but someone did. The air grew still. Conversations nearby dimmed. Mallory could feel every eye waiting for her to stumble. Evan began to answer, but Mallory raised her hand gently, stopping him. Her voice came calm, measured, clear. "I run a food truck downtown," she said. "It's small and it's not glamorous, but it feeds people who work long hours. People who don't have time for events like this. So yes," she added softly, "I suppose my work is quiet, but it matters to me." The room froze. The woman blinked, caught between disbelief and discomfort. Then, somewhere in the back, a man began to clap. Softly. Then another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the applause rippled through the room like a wave of unexpected honesty. Even the woman who'd tried to humiliate her had no choice but to smile through clenched teeth. Mallory didn't bask in it. She simply nodded politely, like she hadn't just dismantled a room built on hierarchy. Evan stood beside her in silence. He didn't intervene. He didn't need to. For once, he wasn't the center of the story. She was. The weeks after the gala moved like a strange kind of calm. For once, the headlines were kind. The tabloids called her the grounded Mrs. Cole, and investors praised Evan's human touch. To the world, it looked like a perfect partnership. But behind closed doors, it was quieter than ever. Mallory moved through the penthouse like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The marble floors still echoed with footsteps that didn't feel like hers. She'd mastered the art of public appearances, learned how to smile through exhaustion, how to survive in his orbit without burning up. But at night, when the events were over and the lights dimmed, the silence between them grew heavier, thick enough to feel like a wall. Evan Cole was a man surrounded by people, but haunted by loneliness. He'd built a life that was untouchable, and in doing so, he'd made himself unreachable. Mallory saw it in the way he sat at dinner, eating in silence like a man attending his own wake. She saw it in the way he stared out the windows, long after the city had fallen asleep. Then one evening, after a long investor dinner, Evan told the driver to take a different route. No explanation, no destination. Mallory frowned. "Where are we going?" He didn't answer, just looked out the window, his expression unreadable. 15 minutes later, the car stopped at a quiet overlook high above the city. Below them, Los Angeles stretched out like a sea of stars. A million lives, all trying to be seen. The night air was cool, smelling faintly of pine and distant rain. Mallory stepped out first, the gravel crunching under her heels. She crossed her arms, glancing at him. "So, this is what billionaires do to unwind." He gave a small, humorless laugh. "No, this is what people do when they forget how to breathe." She turned toward him, caught off guard by the honesty in his tone. He stood beside her, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the skyline. "Do you ever get tired of it?" she asked quietly. "The meetings, the image, the pressure." He exhaled slowly. "Every day. People think wealth means peace. It doesn't. It just buys you a nicer kind of prison." His voice was soft, but laced with a kind of pain she hadn't heard before. Mallory studied him under the faint starlight. For the first time, he didn't look like a man in control. He looked human, tired, worn, alone. "I don't know what it's like to be rich," she said, her voice low. "But I do know what it's like to feel alone, even when you're surrounded by people." Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither of them looked away. Something passed between them, a quiet understanding that didn't need words. Two different worlds, same kind of loneliness. The silence stretched, heavy but strangely comfortable. Then Evan spoke again, barely above a whisper. "You know, when I wrote that contract, I told myself this was just business, a transaction." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But sometimes I forget that." The words hit her like a tremor. Simple, unplanned, real. Mallory's heart raced, but her voice stayed steady. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it sounds like a confession." He smiled faintly, a tired smile that said he already knew. "Maybe it is." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of rain. Mallory turned away, her throat tightening. "Careful, Evan," she murmured. "You're breaking your own contract." He laughed softly, a rare sound, low and almost warm. Maybe some contracts were meant to be broken. For a heartbeat, it felt like crossing a line. When he opened the car door for her later, neither spoke. But both knew something had shifted that couldn't be unsigned. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world below moved on, cars, lights, people. But up there, time stood still. The line between business and emotion, between duty and desire, blurred quietly under the stars. And as they stood side by side, Mallory realized she wasn't afraid of him anymore. Not his power, not his world, not even his silence, because somewhere between the rules they'd written and the walls they'd built, something fragile and forbidden had begun to grow, something that felt dangerously close to real. For a while, it almost felt normal. They found a rhythm, quiet mornings, polite dinners, shared silences that no longer felt suffocating. Evan still worked late, Mallory still stared out at the skyline, wondering what her old life would have become if she'd never said yes. They weren't lovers. Not yet. But there was something gentle growing in the spaces between them. A fragile kind of peace neither of them trusted enough to name. And just when that peace began to feel safe, the world tore it apart. A few side comments at events. Snickers from people who smiled too widely when she passed. The kind of gossip that spreads before anyone dares to confirm it. Then one morning, she woke up to chaos. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Text after text. Notifications piling up like ashes. When she finally opened one, it hit like a punch to the chest. A headline, plastered across every news feed, every gossip site, every business page in the country. The Cole marriage exposed. Contract reveals fake relationship with food truck girl. Her heart stopped. Below the headline was a photo. Her, in her food truck uniform. Hair tied back, apron stained. The same girl the world had applauded for being authentic. Now mocked as a fraud. By noon, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters outside the penthouse. Camera flashes through the glass. The sound of shame echoing through marble halls. And in the middle of it all, Evan was silent. He didn't call. Didn't text. Didn't show up. Mallory felt the panic build in her chest like smoke trapped in her lungs. Every part of her wanted to run. Back to the truck. Back to the noise. Back to the life she at least understood. But she couldn't. Because her name wasn't just hers anymore. It was his. When she finally saw him that afternoon, it was at the shareholder meeting. A room filled with suits and cameras and quiet knives. Evan stood at the podium, ready to present his company's vision for the next quarter. Mallory sat near the back, hidden among polished faces and judgmental stares. At first, it seemed fine, until a voice cut through the air like a blade. Grant Langford, a rival executive with a smirk sharp enough to draw blood. "Mr. Cole," he said loudly, his tone soaked in false politeness, "before we discuss trust and integrity, perhaps you'd care to explain your marriage?" A murmur rippled through the room. Flashbulbs popped. Cameras turned. Evan froze, just for a second. Then, calmly, "My personal life isn't the board's concern." But Grant wasn't finished. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a set of papers. Copies of the contract. Mallory froze. She recognized the envelope. It was from Evan's office. His assistant must have leaked it, maybe sold it, but how she couldn't guess. The exact contract Mallory had signed. "Interesting," Grant said, waving them slightly. "Because this doesn't look like a marriage. It looks like a transaction." Gasps. Whispers. The sound of shutters clicking like distant gunfire. Mallory's stomach twisted. Her breath caught. She felt her face burning. The humiliation cutting deeper than she thought possible. The same paper that had saved her life was now being used to destroy his. And for the first time, she hated herself for saying yes. Reporters waited outside the meeting, their microphones like weapons. "Mrs. Cole, is it true your marriage was fake? Did he pay you? Were you in on the lie?" Mallory pushed past them, eyes blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Every step heavier than the last. She turned down a hallway and pressed her back to the wall. Her chest tight, her pulse pounding in her ears. The noise outside became a dull roar. Her thoughts, chaos. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd signed that contract to save her life, not to watch it unravel in front of the world. Moments later, Evan found her there, alone, shaking, trying to catch her breath. He looked different. Not angry, not cold, just defeated. "Don't answer them," he said quietly. "They want to break us." "They don't have to," she whispered. "They already did." He clenched his jaw, the weight of his own creation pressing down on him. "Let them talk. Let them shout. They've been waiting years to see me fall." "Then why drag me into it?" she snapped, her voice cracking. You should have chosen someone who could survive this world. Evan stepped closer, his voice softer now. No, he said. I chose exactly who I needed. Don't doubt that. She stared at him, this man who had built his life on power, now standing before her powerless. And she realized he wasn't fighting for his company anymore. He was fighting for her. But it was too late. The story was everywhere. The board wanted his resignation. The world wanted blood. And Mallory just wanted peace. The contract that had once felt like salvation was now the very thing dragging them both under. And as the cameras flashed outside, she wondered if maybe this was the justice the universe had been waiting to deliver. Because the man who believed everything could be bought was finally paying the price. The scandal didn't fade. It grew. It swarmed through headlines, talk shows, boardrooms. Everywhere Mallory turned, she saw her name and his dragged across screens and ink. The world had turned the truth into entertainment. The same voices that had once called their story inspiring now called it a scam. Evan Cole's empire, built on silence and control, was suddenly loud, chaotic, crumbling. The board wanted him gone. Investors wanted distance. The media wanted blood. And through it all, Mallory hid in the penthouse, watching from behind the curtains, as the man who had once owned everything was stripped of the one thing he could never buy back, respect. Days passed, then weeks. The phone stopped ringing. The world moved on to its next scandal. But for Evan Cole, the silence wasn't mercy. It was judgment. He barely slept, barely spoke. And one morning, without warning, he walked into the penthouse kitchen, tie undone, eyes hollow, and said quietly, I'm holding a press conference. Mallory froze. Evan, don't. They'll eat you alive. He looked at her, and for the first time, there was no calculation behind his gaze. Only clarity. They already have, he said softly. Now it's time I stop hiding. The next afternoon, the press room was packed wall to wall. Cameras lined the aisles. Reporters leaned forward, waiting for the final blow. Evan stood at the podium, Mallory a few feet behind him, close enough to see him tremble, but far enough to let him face what was coming. He adjusted the microphone. The room fell silent. Yes, he said finally. There was a contract. The silence after his words wasn't applause. It was a kind of stunned mercy. For once, the cameras didn't flash. They just listened. I won't deny it, he continued. I built a marriage out of paper and pride. I thought it would protect me. From rumors, from loneliness, from myself. He paused. The air felt heavier. The truth, heavier still. But somewhere along the way, the woman I thought I was protecting my image with became the only person who made me want to be honest again. He turned then, not to the cameras, not to the crowd, but to her. Mallory didn't trick me. She didn't use me. She saved me. The reporters murmured. Cameras flashed harder. You all wanted a scandal, he said quietly. Here it is. I thought I needed a wife for business. What I found was a woman who made me realize I had no idea what love was or what integrity meant until I met her. He took a breath. Steady now. Strong. You can print that, he added. You can twist it however you want. But that's the truth. And for once, I'm done hiding from it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Alive. The kind of silence that comes after something sacred. And then, applause. Scattered at first, then building, rising until the room trembled with it. Mallory felt her throat tighten. Tears burned, but she didn't let them fall. Evan stepped down from the podium, walked straight toward her, and stopped inches away. The cameras caught it all. The look between them, the way her hand trembled when he took it. You don't have to save me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm not, he said. I'm saving what's left of myself. In that moment, The billionaire who once believed in contracts and control became something entirely new. A man stripped bare, free not because he won, but because he finally stopped lying. And beside him stood the girl the world had mocked, the one who had reminded him that truth, no matter how messy, was the only thing worth owning. The world loves to move on quickly. One week, you're a scandal. The next, you're a lesson everyone pretends to have learned from. After the press conference, Evan Cole vanished from the headlines. The board replaced him. His empire was split. He signed the last of his company shares over to her. "You'll make something real out of them," he'd said. The offices that once carried his name were repainted overnight. But in losing everything he'd built to protect his pride, he'd found something he never expected: peace. He sold the penthouse, traded the driver for an old sedan. He'd kept just enough to start again, not as a CEO, but as a man who finally knew what work meant. Stopped wearing the suits that made him feel untouchable. And most days, he drove quietly through the same streets he used to overlook from 40 floors up. Sometimes he parked a block away from the Copper Taco, the same food truck where it had all begun. He'd stand there under the California sun, hands in his pockets, watching her serve the lunchtime crowd. Mallory never noticed him at first. Or maybe she did, but pretended not to. Her hair was tied up again, her apron stained, imperfect, real. Her laughter unfiltered, unforced. She looked happy, the kind of happy money could never touch. Weeks passed before he finally approached her. No cameras, no suits, no contracts. Just Evan in jeans, holding a takeout order like a peace offering. She looked up surprised, the kind of surprise that isn't shock, but recognition. "You're late," she said quietly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. He exhaled. "I've been trying to figure out how to start over. And turns out you don't start over by rebuilding. You start by admitting what was real the whole time." Mallory folded her arms, still guarded, still herself. "And what was real, Evan?" He looked at her, really looked at her. The sun behind her made her hair glow like fire. The air between them carried the faint smell of tortillas and forgiveness. "You were." He reached into his pocket, not for a ring box, but for a small folded piece of paper. The same contract that had once chained them together. The edges worn, the ink fading. He unfolded it slowly, then tore it in half. Then again, and again. Each rip sounded like closure. "I don't need a contract this time," he said softly. "Just a chance." Mallory stared at the torn paper fluttering to the ground. 1,000 memories in every fragment. The silence stretched between them, gentle but heavy. Then she stepped forward, took his hand, and said the words that ended everything the right way. "Then stop asking for permission, Evan. If you're serious, ask me like you mean it." He smiled, a real smile, the kind she'd never seen on him before. He didn't kneel, didn't make a speech, didn't promise forever. He just looked at her and said, "Marry me." No contracts, no lies, no walls. Mallory's eyes filled, but this time with peace, not pain. "Now that," she whispered, "I can say yes to." A month later, there were no headlines, no red carpets, just a small ceremony behind the Copper Taco. Strings of lights overhead, the smell of grilled peppers and laughter in the air. Tyler walked his sister down the aisle. Evan waited, sleeves rolled up, tie gone, heart open. And when they finally said their vows, there wasn't a single reporter in sight, just a handful of people who believed in second chances. In the end, the girl from the food truck didn't marry the billionaire. She married the man who finally remembered what it meant to be human. And the man who once thought he could buy the world learned that the only thing worth owning was the love that didn't come with a price tag. Months later, those same cameras were gone. No lights, No questions. Just two people who no longer needed the world's permission to be seen. People used to say Evan Cole had everything. Money, power, status. But maybe everything isn't what you own. Maybe it's what still means something when everything else is gone. He spent years buying the illusion of control. And in the end, it took losing it all to understand what freedom really feels like. Because real freedom isn't in wealth, or luxury, or the kind of reputation that fades with one scandal. It's in truth, in the courage to be seen as you really are, even when the world is watching you fall. And Mallory Reed, she was never the woman he bought. She was the woman who taught him the value of what can't be bought. The kind of strength that doesn't come from status, but from staying kind when the world is cruel. From standing tall when everyone expects you to bow. From knowing your worth, even when no one else does. Their story wasn't about wealth. It wasn't even about love. It was about redemption. How two broken people can meet in the wreckage of their own pride and somehow build something whole. The girl who sold tacos from a truck reminded of Billionaire. That love without humility is manipulation. And success without compassion is just emptiness dressed in glass. He thought he could buy loyalty, but she taught him devotion. He thought he could shape her into an image, but she taught him how to be real. And when the world turned its back, she didn't save his company. She saved his soul. So maybe the question isn't whether love can cross worlds. Maybe the real question is, would you still choose honesty if it meant losing everything you built on a lie? Because sometimes the richest people in the room are the ones who've already lost it all and finally learned how to start over. He once thought money could buy silence. Now he understood. Silence only mattered when it came from peace.